Welcome to iPad Pros, the show all about using your iPad to be productive and get work done. I'm Tim Chen, host of the show. This episode is sponsored by Agenda 18. Learn more at agenda.com.
You know, when you had written me about this coming on the show, I thought the iPad audience needs to hear about this because it is an unusual app for the iPad, but it is actually quite iPad friendly.
Welcome back to another episode of iPad Pros. I'm pleased to welcome back to the podcast David Sparks, also known as Mac Sparky. He is the co-host of the Mac Power Users Podcast, Focused, and the Automators Podcast. He was on episodes 99 and 126 of this podcast, if you want to check out those past episodes. And when he was last on, we spoke about DEVONthink, that he had just released a field guide all about. And, well, David's back at it with another new field guide, this time for Obsidian. Obsidian can be a scary app for some, and in this episode, I hope we can make it a bit more approachable. And by the end of our discussion, an app you want to try and see if it will work for you. If you want to support this podcast, the best thing to do is go out and download Agenda, who's sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. I'll be sharing a bit later in this episode more about Agenda, but for now, head on over to agenda.com to learn more and get started with this awesome app that I've used for years at this point to produce the show. Another way to support this podcast and get early access to both iPad Pros and Vision Pros is by supporting the Patreon at patreon.com/iPadPros or by subscribing in Apple Podcasts. My great thanks to everyone that supports the show there. With that, here's my interview with David. Welcome back to the podcast, David.
Thanks, Tim. I'm really happy to be here again.
Yeah, I always like to have you on as you do your field guides, these very... It seems like in-depth, like how long do these things take you to do? It seems like an in-depth, like sabbatical, or not, as a professor would go on.
It depends, on the title. This Obsidian one took like 8 months because it was really hard. Obsidian's a hard tool to teach because it can do anything. So It's like, how do you tell somebody what to do with anything? And so it took a long time to get my head wrapped around a methodology to teach it. Once I got that done, it went pretty well. But that one took a while. I try to do 2 a year, but the last few years I've only got one out. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, Obsidian, as we'll talk about, it is such an in-depth app, and it can be scary to a lot of people, as we'll talk about.
Yeah.
So you were last on back 2021, talking about DEVONthink, which is an app I go way back with. Back in college, it was like kind of a go-to tool for me. I'm curious, Obsidian, has it stolen some of the roles DEVONthink used to have for you, or are these just different new roles altogether?
I feel like Obsidian is very complementary to DEVONthink because, well, for two reasons. The first is they complement each other's shortcomings. Like Obsidian can do attachments and files, but it can't hold a candle to DEVONthink. And DEVONthink can do text, but it's just not as powerful as Obsidian with text. I mean, Obsidian's getting new plugins every day. I mean, the whole thing is built around Markdown text engine. So, like the thing that DEVONthink is best at, it helps with the thing that Obsidian is worse at. So, I basically use DEVONthink as the database, and I do manage the text in Obsidian. In fact, it's interesting. We did a special session as part of the Field Guide Plus edition on using them together, and several people index their whole Obsidian database in DEVONthink because why not? Because you could. It's just a folder full of Markdown files. Why not link it to DEVONthink? So, yeah, I actually find them very complementary. In fact, the release of those courses was intentional because I was already into Obsidian at the time, and I realized that I think DEVONthink is like the foundation, and Obsidian is the cherry on top.
And I'm trying to remember, DEVONthink, you can link to anything within DEVONthink, is that right? Like it has, and then Obsidian has
not just to documents, but to specific locations of documents. Like you could say PDF page 3, and you could create a link to that. And Obsidian does the exact same thing.
Right.
You can create links back to Obsidian, very focused. Mm-hmm. So tying them together is a question of putting the links in the right places.
Yeah, that's kind of a cool use case with using links, which are they're ubiquitous. Yeah. And I'd imagine those links work cross-platform, Mac and iOS, iPad.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, I haven't tried between DEVONthink and Obsidian on iPad, but yeah, I think they should work because they both are kind of universal. Yeah.
Has your process evolved at all in creating the actual field guide since the DEVONthink field guide? Did you do anything different this time around, or?
Well, we're in the process. I used Airtable as like the foundational database for these projects. And then I spend a lot of time using the tool to make the field guides, especially with DEVONthink and Obsidian. We're actually moving for future production into Notion because it just feels like it does a little bit more than Airtable, and I'm not sure what Airtable's future model is. And we moved a bunch of stuff into Notion. So the next field guide will be written with Notion as a background, but this one was done with Airtable and a lot of Obsidian notes and DEVONthink resources. Kind of the usual thing I do.
Okay, excellent. And then for those that haven't used Obsidian, they may have heard of it. Can you share a bit about just kind of the 5,000-foot view of what this app is and what makes it different from the other apps out there?
That's the hard part, right? It's, I guess we'd start by saying it's an Electron app. So it's kind of universal. And the idea of it was you take a folder full of markdown files, which are plain text files, and then you write an application that goes to that folder and looks at interesting ways to tie them together and connect them and do things with them. And that's what Obsidian is. And that really, it's so simple, but that's what makes it so powerful, because any text files on your computer you can throw into it. And then they made the plugin architecture an open architecture. So third parties can write applications for it. Like there's a plugin I use that changes straight quotes into smart quotes, just does that for me or anything. And then, of course, the real magic of it is bidirectional linking. So using the standard wiki convention of two square brackets on either side, you can link to pages and elements inside the database. So you get this very cross-hatched database of text. So you start writing your ideas in it. People use it for dissertations and veterinary appointments and everything in between. It's just a very powerful idea. And then the beauty of it is it's just a folder full of markdown files. So if, Obsidian gets fired into the sun and doesn't exist anymore, your data is completely portable. It's completely owned by you. It's not stored in the cloud anywhere. Well, they do have a cloud sync, but it's end-to-end encrypted. You really have complete ownership of your data. And for the iPad folks, the nice thing is the iPad version is nearly 100% compatible with the Mac version. So all those plugins and all that stuff you can do on the Mac basically translates over to the iPad. So you get Obsidian on an iPad with a keyboard and you feel pretty much like you're working on a Mac.
Yeah. Throw in an external display and you're able to spread out.
Yeah.
Do you know multi-window, what's the story there on iPad versus Mac? Is this an app you use in a single screen, or are you spreading out across multiple screens?
It has the ability to create separate panes inside the single window, and you can multiply and divide on that up and down, like top and bottom, left and right, and within those segments even more. So it also has a tabbing system, so you can have multiple tabs open for different documents, and it just depends what you want to do with them. The biggest challenge, of course, on the iPad is screen space. If you've got a 12.9, you could probably get 2 or 3 windows at max, but I wouldn't want to go much beyond that. But it's an interesting app. I mean, it doesn't feel like an iPad app, if that makes any sense, because of its Electron roots. It's not like your typical iPad app. It feels like the Electron app rendered on an iPad, which some people hate. I think you have to try it to decide if that works for you or not. But the trade-off is all that power. And
you mentioned plugins. You can install those directly on the iPad, or
In fact, the syncing system will sync the installed plugins, and nice. I find that the vast majority of them work. Occasionally, I'll run into a plugin that does not work on iPad, That's where I say there's a bit of a wiggle factor there. Some of them, for one reason or another, don't work on iPad. But and I think it may even be like a permissions thing with Apple. But largely they work, and so the installation you create on your desktop can run on your mobile iPad pretty well. I would say, and I get pushback on this from the Obsidian audience, but I feel like the iPhone experience is subpar. I mean, I feel like the iPad is fine. You got a keyboard attached. It really feels like you're sitting on a laptop. In fact, more than most apps do. Like, working mobilely with an iPad. I do a lot of writing mobile and opening Obsidian in a coffee shop or Disneyland or whatever with a keyboard feels like I'm sitting on my Mac. But the iPhone, the screen size is just so small. It's really hard to make that work on an app that's really, it's more of a translation of the Electron app than it is a native iPhone app. So if you were going to use it just on an iPhone, I'd say maybe look elsewhere. But for iPad stuff, you're fine.
Yeah. It seems like iPhone may be good for reference. You're able to just pull up a document, just check stuff.
Yeah. And that's what people do with it. Like you create views that show you your task list or your current document or whatever. And that's great for that. But to work on a document, I would say the iPad's probably the minimum starting place. Yeah. So I asked Matt Birchler, that was what I should ask you since we were chatting about Obsidian, and he was wondering, just is it the speed, the fact that all the local files are right there, that if the company goes kaput, you have it, the plugins, what about it makes this app really connect with you? The answer to Matt is yes.
Everything.
I mean, it's really a combination. You put together, the data ownership is a big deal. Like, I was interested in Roam Research when that first kind of hit the wire, but I never liked that model of me putting all this data into their cloud and not knowing who else is looking at it. And
were you also probably burned by the Evernote era and the struggles of trying to get everything out of that when that kind of crashed?
I never liked Evernote. This is my dirty secret.
You had the foresight.
From the very beginning, there was two problems with it. First of all, I thought it was butt ugly. And and then the second of all was everybody knew that used Evernote was putting tons of stuff in Evernote, but nobody was using Evernote. You know what I mean? It just became this like closet that you kept stuffing things into.
Yeah, I remember taking a ton of photos and using the OCR, because in those days that was like a new thing. And I did search stuff within that, but
so I didn't really have, and then at one point on Mac Power Users, we had an Evernote account we shared. So if you sent an email to a special email address, it went into our feedback.
And you had the shared notebooks and stuff.
Yeah, we did that for a while, but it just didn't, I just never was sold on it. So I didn't have a problem when they went out. But the question I get asked often is, well, is Obsidian a landing place if you're leaving Evernote? I think it can be. But I also think Apple Notes would be really good for that. I think, in fact, Apple Notes is probably a better fit because it's better with multimedia than Obsidian is. But if you're working with words, there's not much better than Obsidian, in my opinion. It's just so good for that kind of thing. And honestly, if you had that closet full of data in Evernote, I don't think you should move it somewhere else. I think you should just throw it overboard and start over. It's just so much,
Yeah, I use the Mac DEVONthink importer to just like capture it and put it in a separate Evernote database within DEVONthink is where mine ended up.
Yeah, I've been talking a lot lately about Gall's law, the idea that systems need to earn their structure, and that like too often as nerds we'll go into something like Evernote, Obsidian, whatever, and say, well, I'm going to build out a whole structure for this thing. And then you spend days on the right, structure, and then you find you don't even like the tool a week later or something. I think you really should just kind of go slow with it. And Evernote was great for throwing things into that we never read.
Yeah.
And,
no, it's funny, like the whole concept of like
the time investment, and like I used to have a big delicious library, and I'd scan all my DVDs and put them in there, and like I love that, but like it's time that just now it's like I'm never gonna use that now. That's like
yeah.
yeah.
All the time you put into it is kind of like down the toilet.
Yeah. And it's like almost like it's like, oh, this is fun, like gathering all this data, but in the end it's like, is it really fun? Is it just like,
yeah. So be careful with that. But I mean, Obsidian to me is really the premier tool for working with words. I mean, one of my big uses for it, and it's interesting because there's two versions of the course. There's the basic version at $50 and the advanced version at $100. The $100 version comes with a 10 series webinar series. So I'm learning tons from people using it. And people are, like I said, writing dissertations, and they're changing the world with the stuff they're assembling and creating with Obsidian. My big use is what I call my personal operating system, where I found that writing down how I think about things gets me to a level of understanding about how I think about things that I didn't have otherwise. We all have thoughts in our mind, and whether it be about whether we should use DEVONthink or Obsidian or Aristotle's definition of virtue, we all have like some idea of what that is. But when you reduce it to a writing, it really forces you to understand it better. So I've been doing that for years. I call it my Sparky OS. It's my little operating system. And it gives me a structure to hang big decisions on. And not a lot of people are interested in using it for that. But for me, Obsidian is like killer at that. It's just there's nothing that can touch it. And I think that's the thing with Obsidian is you should get to know it a little bit and decide what it becomes for you. I've seen people that use it as a daily log journaling system. I've seen people that have client businesses that use it for that because you can link every transaction with a client using that linking system to the daily notes. So you can go back and see exactly what day you dealt with client X, Y, and Z. And then everything is ending encrypted. So you got no problem syncing it across the wire, because it's your password that they don't know. That's assuming you use the Obsidian sync system. And so it's just, for those people, it's a client management system. Like I said, for other people, they write their PhD thesis. For other people, it's what they call personal knowledge management, which is, the most abused word on the internet right now.
Yeah.
Right behind the word Zen,
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be a PKM. If you want to manage your life through it, it can do that too, because the linking just makes it so easy to navigate and jump around.
That kind of brain dumping as you're thinking through things, does some of that end up in OmniFocus? Like you either copy that out or link to it into OmniFocus?
Yeah. They have a very thorough task system in Obsidian that's through a third-party plugin, and I covered that in the course. And I decided, well, I'm going to use it for a month just to see if I could just run my tasks out of it. Because that's the other thing with Obsidian is like it can become what you want. It's not as good as OmniFocus. I mean, I don't, and it's just because OmniFocus is made for that task. So
yeah, you have the watch app to remind you of different things and like
so like an example would be I will have a project in Obsidian that I'm working on, and that project has a kind of like a canonical page or a canonical document in Obsidian where that's the source of truth, I guess I'd say. And out of that, there'll be a hyperlink to a OmniFocus project and a hyperlink to a Notion page and maybe links to emails that relate to it and like all sorts of things coming in and out of it. I've talked a lot about the idea of contextual computing, and what I mean by that is the idea of using a computer in a way where it just serves your needs. It does exactly what you need it to. And Obsidian can become a really good like source of truth, and like it can link to a DEVONthink folder, it can link to an OmniFocus project, and then you can have links in those apps going back to that page. So with a little bit of thought, you can have a way to jump into a project and stay inside that project and not leave that project for hours, just using those links to jump around. And you're getting a best-in-class experience on each application or project you use. So that's kind of the way I use it. But like I said, doing these webinars, I'm just learning some people are using it for all sorts of things. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think the scary part of Obsidian is It isn't a big like here attachments and stuff that DEVONthink does. It's text, which words can be scary. Like it's just slow. It's like it's like going into space. It's just black emptiness. It's like, what do you put there in the text?
It is, but it really isn't, because everything links, and you can tie it together very quickly. And I find like my thoughts on one topic can lead into another one, and they link, and they have like a graph where you can kind of chase your thoughts around and see how you got from point A to point B. And it's all Markdown. So if you understand Markdown, it's very easy to format it on the fly. And creating links is a simple process of typing two open square brackets, and then the Obsidian indexes everything, so it auto-fills for you while you do it. So I don't know. I find it so nimble. Like I've tried to do stuff like this in Apple Notes and DEVONthink and, Pick Your Poison app. And just none of them make it as easy, so that's why it got really sticky for me.
As far as hierarchies and folders and stuff, what's kind of the organizational mindset with Obsidian? It's kind of a web of interconnects and like...
Yeah, it really is. It's funny because I use more hierarchy than most people. And it may be because I grew up using folders. I'm very comfortable with them. But my personal hierarchy is shallow folders with tags. And Obsidian has this thing called properties, which is a fairly recent addition, but you can categorize your notes by like what area of your life they fit in, or what their status is. Are they active or done? So then you can index on that and like get very quickly a hot list of things that are active and relate to your role as a father or whatever. And So I kind of lost the thread. So you don't need a lot of hierarchy if you can use those things. But I do like rough folders just because, I don't know, just it's that belt and suspenders part of you. And when you look into the Obsidian database, which is a folder that has a bunch of markdown subfolders in it, you can see where things are generally.
Yeah, to make it easier to work with the local files if you need to on your Mac
and that's the other weird thing. It's like you can fiddle around in the database from a third-party app. Like you could use something like Hazel to move stuff around, and Obsidian's just going to follow whatever your lead is. I kind of lost the thread earlier when I was talking about DEVONthink, but like one of the things that's interesting to me is DEVONthink deals with metadata outside of the source file. So metadata has a little like data file on each thing you make. So tags and things you create are all stored there, which makes DEVONthink great because you can export the file and you lose that metadata, but the file remains intact. Whereas in Obsidian, the metadata is embedded in the markdown file, like the little double brackets is in essence metadata. And the properties are YAML data, which is like a header at the top of the file. And they don't step on each other. So like you can do anything you want with metadata in Obsidian and it won't mess up DEVONthink and vice versa. But and that kind of does the same thing with that folder full of markdown files. So if I wanted to have Hazel say, well, look at the files. And if one is marked archive, take the markdown file and move it to an archive folder outside of the Obsidian database. And Obsidian doesn't complain. It just says, oh, that file's not here anymore, so I'm not going to show it to you, and you've now archived it, and it's just, it kind of is mind bending that you can do that to data, right? Like you look at an app like Apple Notes, which is a great app, but that's very much a proprietary database. If you go in there and change a 1 to a 0 anywhere, the whole thing could blow up on you. And that's just not going to happen with Obsidian.
Yeah, I could see people, I believe Ulysses allows you to edit external files. Like if you prefer Ulysses to do some kind of writing thing within your Obsidian, you could probably do that.
Yeah.
As far as the business model, it seems like the free version has quite a lot of stuff. What's kind of the limitations, and where do you run into the roadblocks?
Yeah, I don't have any inside knowledge, but it started out as a free for personal use app. If you're a business user, it's I think $50 a year or something like that. And then they've also monetized features, which is an interesting model. Like I pay some yearly sum for the sync system. Like you could sync these files on iCloud or Dropbox, although people have mixed levels of success with that for various reasons. But, or you could just pay them the annual fee and let them sync it. And the beauty of that is their sync is end-to-end encrypted and the whole system built around it. So it's just the best way to go. It's going to cost you a few bucks. And I figure, why not? I'm not paying for the app. And then they also have a thing they call publish. And like I have a published vault as part of this course, and I pay for that as well. So they put it on a website and people go to a special link and then they can see it. So they've got like multiple methods of monetization. I do know that the team has grown recently, and the app has really got legs over the last few years. So I don't think it's going anywhere. It's a small development team. It doesn't appear to be one of these companies that took a bunch of seed money, so now they've got to like race against the, investors. But I have no personal knowledge of that. But that's from the outside. That's what it looks like to me, is that they're running it on a, hey, let's make money on this thing model instead of let's build it huge and then sell it thing. And that's the kind of apps I prefer, and the team is responsive and the community is responsive. And, I don't know. When you had written me about this, coming on the show, I thought the iPad audience needs to hear about this because it is an unusual app for the iPad, but it is actually quite iPad friendly.
Yeah. And it's, as you said, it seems like pretty much everything's there. And I do like the, you hit Command Comma just like on the Mac and the iPad. It'll open up all the little preferences you can tweak right there. Do those sync to Mac? Like if you have a Mac and iPad, like those preferences, or is it kind of
they come over? Yeah, even like one of the things about Obsidian that's kind of fun, because it's this odd Electron app, it has an HTML user interface configuration. So people who can program the web can develop their own UI for it. So color schemes, fonts, margins, like all the usual suspects. And there's this open database of like 200 or 300 different looks for the app. And you just go under the appearance tab in the settings and they take you to a website, and there's one there for Christmas, like if you could imagine. Yeah, not that I would recommend it, but they've got it, they've got everything from very subtle to like 80s neon.
Can we get like an iOS 6 theme?
That would be kind of fun. I don't know. There is a Things theme, which is pretty funny, which is very popular.
Yeah.
Where they basically just took the look of Things and they applied it to Obsidian. And everybody, so whenever you see a different person's Obsidian database, they all look a little different because people have different preferences.
Yeah. As far as keyboard shortcuts, is that something you use quite a bit of?
Yeah, it's massively programmable. I mean, any command in it, you can set your own keyboard shortcut, and they sync over to iPad too. So
that's awesome.
It's like for instance, was it Control U is the URL one, where I copy a URL to an Obsidian note. That's the one I programmed.
Yeah, and
I'm constantly using it. Then I can go over and dump into DEVONthink or whatever, and it gets me back. That like every new OmniFocus project. Related to a project that's tracked in Obsidian gets that link in the OmniFocus comment area. And then I get a corresponding link back to the OmniFocus project in Obsidian. And then it's magical.
Yeah, that's awesome. For linking to different, files, do you have to know the name? You have to name each file, or how's the actual linking process work? You mentioned the double brackets, but...
Yeah, it's just you hit two open square brackets and start typing the name of it, and it autofills. So,
okay,
like if you've got one on DEVONthink tips, and if I just type like DE, it's going to autofill that for me.
Okay, nice. And you can have different like libraries, and it seems like a unlimited amount.
Well, I mean, it's just they're all separate folders full of Markdown files, but they call it vaults is their term for it. But so like there are some people that have like separate personal and work vaults. The benefit of the app really is in the more notes you have combined, a lot of times the better. But like if you're doing a very specialized project, like if you're an academic and you're doing something very specialized, you want all the research and everything in there, you can make custom vaults for each thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I almost want to I wish I was like younger and could go to college again and like use all these tools, because it'd just be such a different experience. Like,
yeah, but then you think about going to college again, and you're like, "Oh, that's okay.
That's okay. Maybe for a couple days for fun, but yeah."
This episode is sponsored by Agenda. In this quick break, I want to share just a little bit about Agenda if you haven't used it. Agenda, if you haven't tried it out, is a great note-taking app that really thoughtfully integrates your calendar and reminders into your notes. If you have a meeting coming up, you can use an agenda note to prepare for that meeting and have all the information related to that meeting on hand. Do multi-page scans right in Agenda, capture the whiteboard with your camera, sketch things out with your Apple Pencil, and even link to other Agenda notes to have those on hand. You can even collaborate with your coworkers to have a single shared note for that meeting. Your notes, unlike a task manager, have a few different states that is all conveyed through a single radio button. Filled in yellow indicates your task is on the agenda, or is top of mind and shown in a special on the agenda view, letting you view everything important in your life from all your different projects all in one place. A simple tap on the radio button lets you take it off the agenda or mark it as done if it is a note that has a completion state you want to indicate. There's also a wonderful timeline view that lets you view your calendar. Easily link to agenda notes to calendar events, create a brand new agenda note that you want to associate with a certain event, add a reminder to the Reminders app, and you can even quickly reschedule calendar events or reminders. If you ever tried using a task manager to take notes and were frustrated by that experience, give Agenda a try. It's the note-taking app that actually helps you stay on track with your work and personal projects. As you'll hear David share in this episode, it's important to pick an app that is loved by the developers and is getting constantly worked on and improved. There's nothing more frustrating than to invest your time in an app for that app to no longer get updates. Agenda is a prime example of an app that is constantly being improved and worked on by the developers. Agenda launched in May of 2018, and now 5 years later is now at version 18, with some exciting features in the test flight getting ready for yet another release. The developers, you can tell, are also users of their app, and the improvements being made are things actual users like myself want and need. If you haven't tried Agenda, I'd really encourage you to give it a try. Agenda is free to download and use with no obtrusive ads. To unlock the full power of Agenda, give Agenda Premium a shot. One thing that Agenda continues to do that I love is their approach to the premium features and unlocks. If you ever decide to cancel your Agenda Premium subscription, you get to keep all of the premium features available when you were a subscriber. Or you can opt for their lifetime unlock, which will unlock the full power of Agenda on all your Apple devices with a single one-time purchase. To learn more, go to agenda.com. Download Agenda 18 today for free from the App Store. My thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode of iPad Pros. Learn more at www.agenda.com.
Like bookmarking and pins, are these something you ever use? Or
Yeah, they started out with a system called Stars, then they converted to Bookmarks. Bookmarks are a little more powerful. I don't use them that often. Honestly, I know my way around my vault enough. Command O is the search term for a note title.
Okay. Yep.
So I hit Command O and a couple letters, and I'm off to the races. It's I don't use the mouse much. You know what I mean? It's just very fast to hit Command O, and because these are skinny vaults, there's not a lot of heavy data in it. It's mainly text. They are very nimble.
Gotcha. Yeah, the Command O is so nice. Agenda added that a couple months back, and you're just with the keyboard. Just
that seems to have become like the standard, right?
Yeah, for all the power apps or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
It reminds me of like the Quicksilver days when I was using that on the Mac.
Those were good days.
Yeah.
Those were good days.
Is that app still around? Not even.
I saw it was like a year ago, but it's just
it's a legacy.
I don't know what they're doing with it. And did you ever use the Cube interface for Quicksilver?
Yes. Yeah.
It was so great.
It was.
I don't know why like Alfred and Raycast and these guys don't copy that. It was so fun.
Yeah. The era when I got into the Mac was like the Intel transition, and that was just a fun era of just delightful design. Like
yeah.
You mentioned plugins earlier. I know Federico's like hired developers to like customize the app for him. You mentioned some of the plugins earlier. Like what are some others that are worth pointing out?
Well, it depends what you want to do with it. Like if you want to manage tasks, there's a to-do plugin that's very good, or tasks plugin, I'm sorry. I think if there's one you should really try, it's called Data View. And it's a way to index and find notes based on those property data. So it's very, very powerful. And like it kind of gives you a next level way to index and access your vault. So that's a really good one. I mean, I went through like 10 of them in the course, and then in the plus course, we went through like another 10. They really range. I mean, from things like, just take this markdown list and turn it into a mind map, or, whatever it is you want to do, somebody's probably written a plugin for it. It is a super active community writing these plugins, and some of the best ones just do like one little thing. And some of the others seems like they're applications in themselves.
As far as mind maps, do you still use MindNode at all?
Yeah, MindNode remains my mind mapping tool. In fact, Obsidian is an interesting app because you get into it and you think, well, I'm going to do everything in Obsidian, and because I think that's a very tempting proposition as you start getting into it deeper.
But it's not specialized, but you can.
Yeah, but you can. But you get that benefit of everything is connected.
Right.
I feel like for me personally, I went through that. I'm like, maybe I could do journaling here or whatever. And then eventually I realized, no, you know what? Day one is really good at journaling. OmniFocus is really good at task management. And it's like, I kind of pulled back a little bit. And I think that's a very common experience, but you kind of have to get into it and kind of go on that little journey to figure out where you end up.
Yeah. And I discovered, that there are these core plugins. These are first-party plugins.
Yeah.
And there's like this daily note concept. You mentioned journaling.
Yeah.
So this is like a built-in kind of tool that people use for that.
But, like you could use that in two different ways. Like you could use it as a daily journaling tool. And that's great. It's end-to-end encrypted. You're all good. But like I said, I think day one is better for that. So I like getting my photos, and like it does a better job because it's built for it. But if you're working on projects and you want to track progress on projects, the daily note's a great way to link to a project and say, hey, on this day at 11, I spent 2 hours, researching this thing or talking to Mike about this thing, and,
like a journal for a work project kind of.
Yeah. And then because the backlinks work, you could go to the page for the project and it would have backlinks to every day that you worked on it. So you've got a really easy way to kind of keep track of that stuff. People who bill by the hour love it for that kind of insight,
Yeah. And have you built any templates for the kind of projects you work on?
I have built so many templates because they have a built-in template system. So you can template notes. Like if we have an episode of a podcast, I have a template and it's got links back to, all the pages that I need, not only in Obsidian, but outside the internet and in OmniFocus and wherever else I need to go. And it's just kind of like a system. And so you build a template, you activate the template again, because you can easily add keyboard shortcuts. I have a simple keyboard shortcut to activate it, pick the template, make the note, and off I go. So project creation is super easy. The answer is yes. Okay. I've never built a third-party plugin. I don't want to, I could probably cobble one together, but the fact is there are people that are better at that, making really good ones. And if you go into the Obsidian forum and say, gee, I really wish there was a plugin that did this thing, and then like 2 weeks later it shows up. So it's not that hard.
Right. As you mentioned podcasts like notes and stuff, are any of your podcasts, do you do show prep in here? I'd imagine is there a way to share that with the co-host?
No,
that's
the
not
collaboration story is abysmal.
Okay.
It's just, there isn't one. I mean, I think they're working on one, but it really is a solo tool. I mean,
okay.
And, multiple people working in the markdown file at the same time could lead to all sorts of chaos. I know some people have tried to store it on Dropbox and give other people access at the same time. And I guess it could work, but I I think it's probably not recommended and not the best of ideas. Like, so what I do for podcasts is the actual show document is either a Notion page or a Google document, and then everybody can go in there and access it. And then in my notes, the stuff that I am doing personally on it that I don't necessarily want to share with everybody is in Obsidian, and then there's just a URL link so I can jump between them. And I do put Obsidian links in public documents, and it's fun because other people click them and nothing happens. But for me, on my system, it goes to Obsidian because that's a link that I generated.
Yeah.
Because everything is stored locally. Yeah. The data model for me is very attractive, and maybe I'm just a privacy nerd, but I really like the idea of completely controlling some of the most important data in my life, you know?
Yeah, no, and you can back that up in all sorts of different ways. And
yeah.
The iPad version, we've spoken a little bit about being pretty much feature complete. Any other quirks or things of note to just point out?
Well, it just doesn't feel like an iPad app, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about it, try it. Just download the app, and it would probably encourage you to not do Obsidian, because you'd be like, I'm used to an iPad app that looks, more warm and fuzzy than this. This feels, this doesn't feel like a normal iPad app. But I think it's once you get used to the kind of the Obsidian system that you're willing to put up with those limitations. So in one sense, it's a super powerful iPad app because it does pretty much everything the Mac app does. In the other sense, it doesn't feel warm and fuzzy like a normal iPad app. And I think that is a weird kind of course to navigate as a user. Like, I know people who've tried it and said, I just can't do it. I don't like the way it looks. So, and that's fine. But, and there are other apps out there with backlinks and things kind of progressing, but I just haven't seen any with the power and the third party buy-in that this one does.
Yeah, in the music notation realm, it reminds me of Sibelius on the iPad, which is very iPad native, iPad first, doesn't have all the features. And then you have Dorico, which is flat out just the Mac app with all the features, but it's got some rough edges because of it having all the features. I prefer Dorico because I can do everything I need to with it.
Yeah. Well, even like you use Agenda, right? And Agenda has a lot of those features. You could do a lot of this with Agenda. It's just not as powerful.
Yeah, Agenda has the linking different notes, and it has collaboration, so it has that one thing over Obsidian, at least, and in the I really like the relevant links within Agenda. It'll kind of remember stuff. Does Obsidian have any smarts to it, outside of what you're telling it?
Yeah, I mean it's always it searches based on what you're working on and makes suggested links and things like that, I guess. And then also the graph system also surfaces knowledge you may. I have found that it gives me insight sometimes having all this stuff linked together that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But it takes a little commitment before you get to that.
Yeah. And this is graph view. This is kind of like, I don't know. I see pictures of it. It's just kind of wild. It's showing the interlinking.
Okay, let me tell you about the graph view, because everybody shows they show the big graph.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, look at this. And it's like, it looks like a planet or something.
Yeah.
And it's completely useless. The actual graphs that are useful are local graphs. When you're in a note, say, show me a graph of how everything links to this note. And that actually gives you insight. But the global show me everything graph view, I guess it's bragging rights for nerds, but it's
it could be a
really
pretty
useful.
You save it as a lock screen.
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
So you can zoom in from that to the note you're working on, then you can kind of zoom out from there.
Yeah, while you're in the note you're working on, you can just have it display the local graph, which is showing everything this note is connected to and everything connected to this note. Useful. The global one, in my opinion, I'm sure there are people who find ways to use it, but I don't find it. I mean, the graph tool is very powerful. You can say, only show me notes with this tag on it or with this property. I mean, they've got many ways to slice and dice it, but the global graph view, while it looks interesting, it's not that useful in my opinion.
Yeah. Can you color code notes so that globe would have different colors of different notes?
Yeah, depending on what your appearance you load, and there's different schemes for it.
Yeah. Do you have hopes for Obsidian on visionOS? Will this just be kind of like the Electron app?
Good question. Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, the idea of Electron is it goes anywhere. I mean, they got it on iPad, so maybe they've got a plan. I don't know. That's a good question.
I mean, it'd be fun going in that graph and visionOS.
Yeah, like going to the universe.
Right, yeah.
Really feel like you're in the Mind Palace, right?
Yeah, exactly. As far as automation, is this more on the Mac side of things, or is there shortcuts integration, or do you need to use things like Hazel to kind of like...
the automation is actually a pretty good story on this app because they're text files, and you can automate text files, and you can do almost anything you want with them. Like even with shortcuts.
Yeah, you don't even need Obsidian shortcuts because you're just working with text, which there's all sorts of shortcuts for them.
Yeah. So and the way it works with the Vault, I mean, with the Sync, if you're using it on an iPad and you're using Obsidian Sync, you actually store the Vault in your local iPad storage, which almost nobody does anything in that storage, right? You've almost always got it in iCloud or like some cloud storage. But there is local storage on your iPad. So you save the Vault to your local storage on iPad, then make that the source of the Sync backup to their Vault. And that way it doesn't go to iCloud so that you kept it secret. It remains encrypted. And that's totally accessible by shortcuts. So you could go into shortcuts and change words in it. You could add notes, delete notes, move the notes. You can do anything that you can with a file or text management. You can append a text file. I mean, there's almost nothing you can't do with shortcuts automation on text files. So yeah, it's actually pretty good.
Yeah. If you throw an image into the Files app in your Obsidian database, what does that do when you open Obsidian?
Obsidian indexes it.
Okay.
And it just keeps it there. So, and you can reference it with a markdown link. So, I've been getting blowback from people because talking about the field guide. I tell people like I prefer probably DEVONthink for heavy file stuff, but there's a lot of people that throw everything in their Obsidian Vault, Microsoft Word documents, images, whatever, and then they can access it and link it in Obsidian. I just feel like I like the idea of this pristine text depository and. So I don't put a lot of files in there. You can also manage with the way those files are managed. I prefer, there's a setting to say, anytime I add a file attachment to a document in Obsidian, create a subfolder right in the database right there and keep them together so I can find them later. But some people just kind of throw them all into the main directory or some big multimedia folder.
Yeah. As far as you mentioned, you can do almost anything with this through shortcuts and just working with text. Have you seen people use like the action button to like turn a dictation into text that's like in an inbox or Obsidian kind of thing? Is that something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you could do that. I think a lot of people, myself included, often use drafts for capture.
Yeah,
I think drafts is a better capture tool than Obsidian. But Drafts works with Obsidian, so you can push a button in Drafts and dump the file into your Obsidian file location. It's pretty seamless. But I actually prefer Drafts for like if I want to capture text off an action button. That's where I would recommend you go.
Gotcha. Do you use any kind of inbox with Obsidian, or is it kind of organized from the get-go?
I have a folder called Inbox, and I put stuff in there. And I'm really stingy about my Obsidian database. I don't like to put everything in there. So like sometimes stuff goes into the inbox and I look at it later. I'm like, that was a dumb idea. And I'll just delete it. I want Obsidian to be good information that I can rely on. I feel like one of the mistakes people make is they Evernote it. They throw everything in the kitchen sink in and they've got all these links and everything's messy and they don't actually get the benefit of it. I think there is... you can overdo links and you can overdo imports into the apps like that. One of the things they just did recently that I should point out is the developers built a Apple Notes import tool. And because, Apple Notes has that proprietary database, it's actually hard to get notes out. It's almost a roach motel. It's not as bad as Evernote, but it's not great. But they built a tool with Obsidian that goes through and parses pulls out your rich text notes, converts them to Markdown, and takes all your attachments and imports it into your Obsidian Vault into a special folder called Apple Notes. So if you want to play with it and you've got an Apple Notes database, just go into the to the plugins and download the importer plugin, which is made by the developer, and just import your Apple Notes, and just you've got a starting point.
That's really cool. Is that I can't imagine that works on iPad. Or does it?
I have not tried it.
Okay.
So I don't know. I did it on a Mac.
Yeah.
So I don't
know.
Yeah. You may have to get your MacBook Air out of mothballs, Tim.
Yeah. My 20. It's 12 years old now. That good old faithful.
Still going, right?
Still going strong. Yeah. It's my iTunes Match uploader.
Yeah.
I'll get on my external super drive, plug it in, and rip some limited edition soundtracks, which I can't get elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, outside of pure text documents, there's these canvases. Do you use these, and what are these for?
Canvases is a feature where it kind of has you can make a graphic diagram. It's like a diagramming tool in Obsidian.
Kind of like Freeform, or
yeah, but not as good probably. But the beauty of it is that it ties to Obsidian Notes. So like if you wanted to put together like a overview of all your active obligations and link them to the notes that relate to those obligations. I mean, the more buy-in you have to Obsidian, the more useful those features become.
Yeah, because you could highlight this. Can you deal with shapes? Can you link a shape? So I like highlight this square and link that to a note kind of thing. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah, everything is linked, and then you could link back to it. So it's a very kind of nimble thought environment. And canvases, if you think visually, like me, that can be of use.
Very cool. And then, is this a tool? Should authors stick with Scrivener, or could you do a book in an EPUB export through Obsidian?
Yeah, you could absolutely write a book in it, and people do. I mean, it's very light-footed text editor, but you can get plugins to do a bunch of stuff to the text for you and format it, and like there's a lot you can do with tools. And if you want to turn it into typewriter mode or no distraction mode, there's plugins for that too. So you can create whatever writing environment you want, but you're writing in a simple text editor, so there's not a lot of distractions. And I've written many blog posts and extended things, legal contracts, whatever. I've written a lot of stuff in Obsidian over the years.
Yeah, I'd imagine you could have a special character like profiles and all sorts of stuff if you wanted to.
Yeah. And it's all linked together, which is so it's super easy, and you can set up multiple panes. I mean, Scrivener is a dedicated tool for that. Maybe it's better. I don't know. But this is an environment in which you could do that sort of work. Yeah.
Do you have a way to export directly to your blog from this, or are you copy and pasting?
Because it's Markdown, I'm good. Markdown is kind of the lingua franca for me. So long as it's Markdown, I can put it anywhere. Yeah, but you can also, they have two modes. They have like the edit and the preview mode. In the preview mode, you can copy out as rich text if that's what you need.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
So this has become definitely one of your core apps. What are your core apps these days? Obsidian.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I'm always looking at things. I actually have recently started making a document called my tech stack because I need to document my experiments and make sure I don't waste too much time on it. Obsidian is where I do thinking. Apple Notes is where I keep PKM type information, like, the veterinary appointments and stuff like that. I don't want to kind of clutter my Obsidian database with stuff like that. OmniFocus is where I manage tasks, but because I've got a team member and a few other people helping me, we're doing some stuff in Notion now because they have to be able to see it too. So there's a little bit of bleed over. Some projects are managed in Obsidian and OmniFocus, and some of them are managed in Notion. It just depends on the project, which isn't ideal to have it in
the web
places.
Version of OmniFocus doesn't solve any of that. It's still a personal kind of use.
Yeah. It really is not ideal. I mean, they've talked about collaboration too. I'm not even sure I want collaboration in OmniFocus. I kind of like having... Obsidian and OmniFocus to me are very personal buckets, and I'm not sure even if I could share it that I would. but even like there's spillover, like Obsidian Field Guide. I'm doing these webinars for the Plus versions, and all of that is tracked in Obsidian. But then when I have a guest in, I just put the markdown into Apple Note and share the note with the person who's the guest. So they have the links to the Zoom call and things like that. So there's a little bit of flexibility in the system for me. And then the calendar, which is a key component for me, is Fantastical. Mail, I've tried everything, and I keep coming back to Apple Mail.
But, it's a sad state with it. Just nothing really is.
Yeah, but with I have what I call Apple Mail with a SaneBox chaser. And SaneBox has been a sponsor of the podcast, so I should say that. But they've got a system like in there where you can go in and block domains, and there's a lot of cool tools in SaneBox that allow you to make Apple Mail work harder for you. So I do that. But yeah, I am struggling right now to like kind of nail down where all the lines are drawn, because there are some great tools, and we're going through this revolution of PKM and linked notes where it seems like there's a new tool every week. But my feeling on that is, I wouldn't spend a lot of time in whatever the latest one this week is. I think you need to kind of let them mature and make sure it's an app that's got legs and is going to be around for a while, because it's a massive investment of your time to put stuff into these things. And if they they say, well, we didn't get enough we didn't get enough users to do a capital raise, so we're shutting it down. And that's happened to some of these tools already, and I'm not a big fan of that. I think for me, the key tools for notes are Obsidian and Apple Notes at this point. But then I see you in Agenda, and I'm like tempted. I'm like, I should be looking at Agenda.
Yeah, no, I love Agenda. It's very Apple-y. Like it's
yeah.
They take advantage of all the things. When in creating this field guide, did you learn anything new about Obsidian that you're now implementing in how you use the app?
Not particularly. I've been using Obsidian since very early days, because I immediately understood the value of a local database. And, everybody was talking about Roam 3 or 4 years ago, Roam Research. And I could not, I even wrote the head guy at one point. He wrote me back. I said, well, what's your plan for end-to-end encryption? And they're like, well, we don't really know. And I'm like, I just don't,
Yeah.
So as soon as I saw Obsidian show up, I tried it out immediately. And initially it wasn't mature enough, but it very quickly, and that's a weird thing with this app, is it is evolving so quickly. But very quickly it got to a point where I could use it, and so I've been using it for 3 or 4 years. So I didn't learn a lot new because I'm in it every day as it is.
Yeah, gotcha. And doing the interviews for the Plus version of the Field Guide, what were some of your favorite guests, and what were some of the most surprising things you kind of learned from them?
I was very picky about who we interviewed, so everybody here is really great. I mean, Nick Milo from Linking Your Thinking is kind of like one of the leaders in Obsidian space. But we also had Ryan Murphy on, who's written multiple plugins and does amazing things with it. And one of the fun ones was Lee Garrett, who came in. Lee is a relatively new Obsidian user, but he's super techie and very smart. And seeing somebody starting from, scratch with it. And he had interesting ideas that I hadn't heard of before, because he's bringing his own distinct viewpoint to the application. They've all been good though, honestly. It's been really fun. We still have as I record this, I still have one more interview. That one's going to be with Mike Schmitz, and a couple more of those sessions. I had originally promised on the sales page 6 sessions, but it's grown to 10 since then.
It's a good problem, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. Anything we didn't cover about Obsidian that you'd like to before we wrap it up?
It is a very different animal. It's very powerful. And if you're curious about it, you should just give it a try and see what you think.
Yeah, it's a free download.
Yeah, a free download. My introductory free portion of the course is like 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's a lot. I was watching it. It's like this.
Yeah, so you can watch that and get yourself going. And that would kind of get you going. You can see it, and I think you would know pretty soon if it's for you or not. And if it's not for you, that's fine. I think we all have to find the tools that work with us, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to add a discount, though, FOT, Friends of Tim.
Excellent. Thank you.
And that'll get you 10% off. So
awesome.
Make sure to put that in if you decide to buy it. And we'll put a link in.
Awesome. Thank you, David. Where can people find the Field Guide, Obsidian, and your other ones? And what else?
Everything for me is at maxsparky.com. If you want to go specifically to the Field Guides, go to learn.maxsparky.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tim.
Well, that's my discussion with David. My thanks to David for his time recording, and my thanks to you for your time and attention tuning in. Make sure to check out the Obsidian Field Guide and to use the promo code FOT to get 10% off. I'll link directly to that in the show notes and episode description of this podcast. And finally, my thanks again to Agenda for sponsoring this episode. Learn more at www.agenda.com and download the app today for free from the App Store to get started. With that, I'll talk to everyone again real soon.